Hi, everyone. Monica Soni. I'm here back with Dr. Simkin and Dr. Aiken, who have been just dropping knowledge on me about how do we think about advanced care planning, systems level, financial reimbursement, and now we're getting kind of to the core unit of practitioner and patient. All of us are primary care physicians and have practiced in that space for a while. The work is hard. Being a primary care practitioner is extremely challenging, and I feel like it continues to get more challenging over time. So maybe I'm going to start with you, Dr. Aiken. You actually, before going to the health plan, spent your life really in this space and obviously working with trainees as well. How do practitioners overcome the perceived and true barriers of time, of patient resistance, insufficient training, American culture, which very much stigmatizes death? How do you teach physicians about that, practitioners about that? To share some of your thoughts with me.
I would say in one word, normalize. It's rendering normal care. And so just as you would render any other care, you could and should think of it that way. And then, so then from there, you brought up a number of different barriers, a number of different concerns, and I think you can start to walk through them. And you talked about evidence-based medicine before, and the evidence, you can start to reveal the evidence, to the providers. Well, I would say first, there's always going to be a core of those that are interested and those that are willing and those that want to advance, any particular, kind of movement. And that's true with advanced care planning for sure, and end of life care. And so you identify those folks, and those folks can help to, become part of a coalition, and to spread the word and to help people, walk through this. And so, there are provider issues to walk through. There are, patient issues to sort of walk through. But Dr. Simpkin said before, it has been shown in our experience, and in the studies that people want to talk about this, but they also don't want to bring it up. And so then it becomes, incumbent upon the provider, the physician, to bring this up. And I think in the course of normal care, it can just be another question on the list of questions, in terms of preventive services. And so, you can introduce it in the context of ongoing regular primary care. It's an, and it could be set up as a separate visit, or, it can be incorporated into a current visit. I do think that, bringing it up and then promising to address it at an upcoming visit, is sort of an easy approach. So you don't have to, the patient doesn't feel like, put in a corner. But for those that want to talk about it, it might turn into an advanced care planning session right then and there. For those who are, busy and just want to get their blood pressure looked at and then move on, oftentimes they'll say, I do want to talk about it. And yes, if we can do that at the next visit and make that the focus, I'd like to do that. And so I think normalizing it and incorporating it into the regular everyday care that you do, and having champions who help people, who help providers understand, and then help them understand the evidence, and the importance, of this service. And then cultural phenomena can start to build and grow and become normalized within an organization. So I'll go ahead, please.
I'm going to interrupt because I feel like you set me up to tell you that we took all of those ideas. We basically were told, educate your group. And what we did is we first looked at what percentage of healthcare proxies were present in each person's practice and in each office group. Yeah. And we figured out that there was a significant difference across our 50 practitioners. And so we realized that this was about who's comfortable with this and who isn't, tried to educate people about some specifics, and tried to create a culture where this was normative. So we looked at people who had 80% of their panel with healthcare proxies and said, how did you do that? And went to the people with 20% on their list and said, these are the very specific things that you can do to increase your healthcare proxies. Well, as we know, it's not just healthcare proxies, it's a conversation about healthcare proxies. But I think, we have clinical champions in each of our 4 centers. We have people identified to go to the practitioners with the low values on their healthcare proxies or on their advanced care conversations and say, what can we do to help you? What are the stumbling blocks? Because it comes down to the individual practitioner. I'm into it. I like telling these stories. If somebody hasn't had a conversation, I say, my father died when he was 67. My mother was 60, and she wanted to have a conversation about this. So she introduced the whole idea to me. She said, I'm not going through what he went through. I'm checking out. I said, Mom, you're 60. But it generated a conversation that sort of everybody can appreciate. We've all been through this.
Yeah, you said something that I want to just pull forward, which is there are some practitioners in your group, 80% of pieces documented and other with 20. I mean, that now is becoming chance, right? Like if we didn't intervene, if you guys didn't intervene,
Right.
It's just chance now for patients, and that is unacceptable, right? Like we don't believe that it should be kind of random chances whether or not you have maybe the death that you want to have or a death that is not the one you want to have. And so I just, that stat right there is so compelling. And then you both said this about champions, who are your early adopters, who are going to be the ones to carry the flag, and then doing peer learning, right? None of us have all of the answers to all of the questions, but somebody does, and somebody can teach us about that particular thing and be the subject matter expert. And actually having it come from your peers, often more accepted and more practical and tactical anyway than anything that any of us would say from the outside. So really, I think super helpful tips there.
To layer in one more little item, and that is, the quality management team. As you pointed out, care shouldn't be random. And so I think it becomes a quality improvement initiative and a quality improvement, issue to have a standardized best practice in your institution. And so you can, have the leaders who enjoy it, and then also have the disciplinarians who make sure that it happens across the board in a standard fashion.
That's absolutely right. Both data driven from what does the evidence say that's well published, and then like what's happening on the ground level from a performance management perspective. I think that's great.
And we've offered our either younger providers or folks who just say, I'm not good at this, what do I do? We say, pick one of the champions and refer to them. I'd like you to have a conversation with Dr. Simkin about end of life planning. He's good at this, and I don't want you to miss out. So we've just offered ourselves to the group to say, of course, all of us are just as comfortable.
Excellent. Mentoring, role playing, modeling. I mean, that's how we learn in medicine. You learn a lot just on the job, unfortunately. And, you hope that there's someone next to you who can teach you how to do it the right way or a better way. Maybe I'll pass it back to you, Dr. Simkin. What do you do when this is like not on the patient's radar at all? So, you talked about maybe the CMA brings the document. What do you do when you see the patient sort of pushing it to the side or, leaving it on the table?
I have 2 stories. Believe me, it happens more than once. So I had a mildly demented 92-year-old in the office with his family. So one of the lines I use is, would it surprise you to think that 10 years from now, you'll probably be dead? 92. Seemed like a reasonable comment to me, not too horny. And he looks at me and he says, why are you trying to rush me out of this world so quickly? And I said, is it safe to say that you have no interest in discussing this? And he said, bingo. So that was one guy. But the second is more complicated and sort of more interesting. I have a retired nun who is 90. She has a lot of problems. She has two indolent cancers. She has a chronic anemia that's profound. She has an ischemic cardiomyopathy of 20% ejection fraction. She has chronic diarrhea. She's obese. She has a lot of arthritis. She's pretty miserable. But she doesn't have the same conversation because of her religious beliefs. She doesn't have a sense that she's in charge of her life. She has a sense that God is in charge of her life. So she wants to turn everything over to God. But this is a woman I've known for 30 years, and we're doing monthly home visits. We talk a lot about end of life. We just don't use the same concepts and the same criteria. It's not just her making her decisions about end of life care. It's just sort of talking about life and getting her to make decisions about what she's able to tolerate and what she isn't, and finding some equanimity for her. So we don't not talk about death and dying. We just talk about it differently.
Can I just pull two things forward? One, in the first story, that was actually a way of asking permission, which is such, it's a valuable tool. And I hope that we all as practitioners, everywhere do that, but I know we don't. And so, you don't have to say, may I talk about this? There's all sorts of ways to enter into a conversation and clearly get the feedback. So the first one was about permission. The second one, though, you're a very skilled, experienced practitioner. Tell us more about how do you talk about it without talking about it? Because I think there's probably some nuggets in there that are worth sharing.
So I say to her, what I worry about is that your life is filled with suffering. And that when you wake up in the morning, all you see is your shortness of breath and your diarrhea and your pain. And I think that you're an amazing person and you generally have a lot of gratitude towards your life. How are you able to have gratitude now in the midst of your suffering? How is that working for you? So she talks about gratitude and loving her sister and appreciating her sister. And I said to her, if you get to the point where you don't feel grateful to be alive and you really want something else, will you tell me? So she said, yes, I'll tell you. And I had told her a story about a woman who eventually died of ovarian cancer. And one horrible weekend, she got so sick, and I called her parents from Florida, and she survived the weekend. And she said to me, why did you call my parents? I said, because I thought you were dying. She said, I knew I wasn't dying. You should have asked me. So I told my lovely 90-year-old friend this story, and I said, so will you tell me when you know? She said, I'll tell you.
Twice asking for permission. I think that's key, right? Just in the physician-patient relationship. We can't be that old school paternalistic, do it, or not. We really do, I think, in order to be most effective and most appreciated, not for the ego's sake, but on the part of the patient, seeing good service, right? Best in class sort of service. I think Dr. Simpkins, just demonstrating, with his stories that best in class service. So it's really getting to know the customer, getting to know your patient, getting to, tease out what are their values, what are their needs, what are they really looking for in the care that they're receiving. And that's all advanced care planning right out there. And it's not a one and done. It's an ongoing discussion, and it can change, but typically people don't, reverse course. But in any case, I very much appreciate your stories, Dr. Simpkin, and your skill and sharing that.
As do I. Dr. Aiken, let me push that thread that you just started to pull, which is, how does advanced care planning tie into these other concepts, which we all agree are important, like whole person care and shared decision making? I mean, these are philosophies that I think when you say them, everyone's like, of course we should do that. But sometimes it feels like there's a disconnect between saying those things and then things like advanced care planning, or even things like health equity. How do those things how are they all the same thing, really?
Sounds good. How do you do it?
Yeah.
And Dr. Simpkin is demonstrating for us how it can be done so well. So when I think about that, I think about the World Health Organization definition of health. I think it was from 1942 or 47, maybe. In any case, it's a state of physical, emotional, social, financial, and spiritual well-being. And so that's a tall order, for any of us to be fully healthy. And so it demonstrates that we can be healthy in some domains and less healthy in other domains. But I do think, that it gets at really that emotional level and the crossover between physical health and emotional health, and then onto, for some people, spiritual health. And not that we're in the business of, being spiritual, practitioners. But people do have that spiritual component, and it is there, and we can, talk about it, as, Dr. Simpkin was beautifully displaying, really. I mean, just revealing. So we can walk that line, and listen to the patient's spirituality, and try to, help guide the conversation and decision making in reflection of their state and their situation and their desires, and try to figure a path forward. And so that shared decision making is really, trying to get to know each other, the patient, knowing the doctor, and the doctor knowing the patient, and walk that path together. Like, what is the best, what's the best that I can bring to you, and what is it that you require of me? And that's that asking for permission. And I think asking for permission opens a door, and out comes respect. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm asking you how I can help.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one more story that comes to mind. A dear patient of 30 plus years, got lymphoma, was an artist, was really struggling to finish some of his career work, and got put on chemo that made him sick as hell. And he basically called me and said, "I'm not doing that again." So I called the oncologist and said, "The guy's an artist. He's got several months of work that he wants to finish. Can you come up with a regimen that won't kill him and will keep him going?" And he came up with basically 4 or 5 months that the guy tolerated. So he calls me and he says, I finished my chapter and I finished my sculpture, and I think, the pain in my abdomen is building up enough that I'm ready to go to the next phase, but I've never done this before. And I laughed for a second. I said, "Dennis, I've done this before. I can help you do this. You're looking for guidance, and this is what we do." So to me, it really came down to, we have skills that we're supposed to share with our patients, and we have seen death and dying, and they haven't. So if we're going to abdicate that responsibility, who do they go to for that? So that just, and this guy's wife ended up saying it was a beautiful death. He was ready, and he just was able to let go at the end because he was cared for. Anyway, a very profound end for him.
And, bravo to you for knowing that there's always out of the box approaches, right? Like pushing our specialists also to say, well, that is not acceptable in this circumstance. What actually would be? And because to both of your points, you knew your patient, you were sharing what was important, you had a trusting relationship, you got permission to go and actually try to match his wishes. You were able to accomplish that alongside them. Really, really a beautiful story. All right, well, I'm going to ask you all maybe a difficult question, maybe not. You know, sometimes there's the perception in healthcare, more American healthcare, more is better, more is better, more is better. I think all of us probably know firsthand that that is definitely not always true. Can each of you share, you know, what is for you a good death? What does that look like? And then the subsequent question is, does your healthcare provider know that? So I can start, and while you guys are thinking about it, but first I'll share a story, which is, maybe we're extremist about this, but my sister and I, we are thankfully both in good health, but anytime one of us is maybe leaving the country, or one of us was scheduled for a planned C-section, we send each other these emails, which are essentially like a living will. So we're like, here are my passcodes, here's all my money. Here's what I want you to do with the kids. Here are my current wishes about this. If this were to happen, this is what I want you to do. And it's a bit more fleshed out than some of our more formal executed legal documents. So like in the moment, each of us sort of knows what's going on. And she went on a 2-week trip, and so sent me sort of the same email, and kind of do this back and forth. So we think about this a lot. We live this a lot. For me, I think what would be a good death is first that people in my life are prepared, including my young children, as best as they can be, that I've been able to spend as much time as I can at home with those loved ones, that there's a lot of support wrapped around my partner, who would struggle immensely and sort of be incapacitated. And so thinking about, did I do the wraparound for him as well? I think I would, I have young kids, so I would want to, give it a college go in terms of what the gold standard therapies are, but I don't want to be suffering, and I don't want to be unable to engage with those around me. So that's really important. I'm happy to stop care if it gives me my mental faculties and some physical capability to still be with folks around me. So that to me is what a good death looks like, ideally at home, where I can be with the people who I love so dearly. And I would say, I don't think that my primary care provider knows that in as much detail as they probably should. So the push is on me to make sure that I'm a little bit more explicit about that, especially given my age, where people often don't talk to me about it, and I have very clear wishes. Okay, who's ready?
I'll go. I'll take a shot. And I think Dr. Simpkin's got more experience and eloquence than I do. So I'd like him to get the last word. So let's see. I do have, I'll just say flat out, I've got an advanced care plan and have had one for years, and have had conversations, with my wife and my provider. My provider, doctor has that. And I hope that, that it will be taken out and utilized. But your question is, transcends even just, do you have you gone through that process or not, and kind of gets into how deeply have you gotten sort of into that process, and you've gotten, well into that process. And I, as you were talking, I was thinking about, control or lack of control, purposefulness, or just sort of allowing, fate to do its thing. And so I do believe that most people have purpose and do things purposefully, and don't like to abdicate control over much. But when it comes to death and dying, a lot of people just want to put their head in the sand because it just seems, so awful. And I think that these kinds of conversations about the ability to have control and the ability to help guide the outcome. I mean, the ultimate outcome is inevitable, and will hit all of us. But the path to that, is going to vary. My grandfather died of a heart attack in his sleep the night after a 4th of July party, that we all attended as a family. And so, I think that's the way he would have wanted it. And, on the other hand, I've got, my mother actually died of cancer, and that lasted over 10 years. And so that was sort of the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of, how that played out. But, I said at the beginning that it was personal and professional experience that connected me to this. And that is that personal experience. And my mother did, there really wasn't, advanced care planning existed, but it really was like not hardly known at all. But there were purposeful people out there who decide what it is they want to do and not want to do, and my mother was one of them. And she's had clear intent about what she would tolerate, what she wouldn't tolerate, and what she would take and not. And she was a God-fearing Catholic, and had a lot of the sort of those nun kind of things going on, and wasn't going to look to promote death. But wasn't going to look to extend it at all cost. And so she chose, to end her interventional care and move to palliative care and move to hospice. And that was all very thoughtful and very purposeful, and just served as, a good example for me.
I will jump in. Paul, you're very sweet. I have a lot to say about this topic. I started off saying that my father was 67 when he died, and my mother was 60. She died at 80. We had 20 years of conversation about death and dying. She was an active member of the Hemlock Society. She generated the conversation if I wasn't able to generate the conversation. But my mother had a good death, and she died of pancreatic cancer, which is sort of an oxymoron for most of us. But my mother's biggest fear was ending up in a nursing home. So when she got pancreatic cancer, one of the things that occurred to me was to say to her, "You're not going to end up in a nursing home." She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You'll manage at home as long as you can, and then you'll move in with my wife and me." She said, "Well, I can't do that." I said, "Oh, yes, you can." I said, "I've been helping other people die for 20 years. I can help you die for 6 months." So we had this very profound 4 months of conversation about all of this. And she was blessed. She was a wonderful woman. She did not have pain. She did not have suffering. She was mentally intact up until 24 hours before her death. And she died peacefully in my home. However, I'm going to throw one monkey wrench into things, which is I read an article a few years ago called How to Have a Good Death. And it was basically saying that there's actually no way to plan it or to make it work because there are too many contingencies. There are too many glitches that can occur. You can't really plan it. You want to plan it, but you can't. And the end of this article very beautifully said, try to live a good life and you'll have a good death. And I will leave you with that sentiment. I don't have any answers about how to actually make it work, but I really like the sentiments that if we can contribute to our patients' good health and we're caring about people, hopefully we'll end up with a good death. My mother lived her life that way and ended up with that. So I'm banking on that.
Oh, thank you all for being with me today. Honestly, I couldn't imagine a beautiful morning spent with you all. I really appreciate it. And I hope that we get to convene again.